Walsh here. Hey, look, Google fired that employee because that employee expressed a political opinion. I don't care what your politics are. That should concern you. We'll talk about it when Freedom returns at 5.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and pleased to be joined again by Theodore Dalrymple, who is an English writer, a psychiatrist. He's got a new book out, a book of short stories called The Proper Procedure and Other Stories. I read all of Dalrymple's stuff, but I have not gotten my free copy of The Proper Procedure yet.
Oh, that's how you operate?
Well, now that I'm a big shot radio talk show host, I only read things that are given to me free. But I plan to read it, and he's being compared in some of the reviews I read to Anton Chekhov. I mean, this is I mean, they were both. Chekhov was a doctor as well. You know, Dalrymple was a psychiatrist, but. I mean, is this on the order of Three Sisters or the Cherry Orchard? Well, let's find out. We're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Theodore Dalrymple. Theodore Dalrymple, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I want to. There's a range of kind of ethical topics in the medical arena I'd like to chat with you about, since it's been a spell since we talked to you, and of course. With the debate we're having in this country about moving towards this kind of single-payer system that you have in the UK, the Charlie Gard case, and what that speaks to in terms of medical ethics when the state is in charge of life and death decisions.
Yes, well, that case was actually a very difficult case. The point about it was that the parents had raised money to go and have treatment, which almost certainly wouldn't have worked. I mean, it was. I think they were given false hope and they were misled, and that is a very bad thing to do, to give people false hope. Whether a child of that age should be moved is a difficult question. I couldn't see anything wrong with them going, but I was very uneasy about the hope that they had been given.
Well, where should the decision lie?
Well, in this case, I think it might have. It should have lain with the parents. There are, however, cases where the law must intervene because, unfortunately, there are cranks about.
Well, sure.
I remember, for example, when I was a very young doctor, or a student actually, seeing parents who believed that carrot juice was the complete food for babies. Mm-hmm. And obviously something had to be done about that. They were not the best judges of whether carrot juice was a complete food.
But in the end, they wouldn't even let them decide where he was going to die.
Well, that's extremely foolish, the question of a very tiny baby like that would certainly not. I don't think it could be said to have suffered if it had gone home.
And one of the other issues too. I mean, this really getting outside of the issue of abusive parents or ignorant parents, as you're describing. The issue of ideological medical professionals, as euthanasia picks up steam, as it has in Europe, it's starting to in America. There was a piece in the New York Times over the weekend with a doctor in California kind of rhetorically asking the question, should I help my patients die? And the utilitarianism that the state and what doctors are becoming, agents of the state, are employing to make decisions about life and death, to encourage people, even mentally ill people, even disabled persons, to voluntary euthanasia. And now we're to the point that was predicted by people 20, 25 years ago, and they were laughed at, where we're talking about voluntary euthanasia for the purpose of organ harvesting. And so the kind of utilitarianism propagated by the state and employed by doctors who, in some systems, like the British system, have become agents of the state. That this is a concern, or no?
Well, I think one of the problems is the notion of a right to an easeful death. If you have a right to an easeful death, then someone's got to supply an easeful death. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's not a right. In other words, you then have to oblige someone to kill you. If I say, I want an easeful death, and I have a right to it, someone must supply it. And so, in that case, doctors are going to be forced, actually, either to do it themselves, or they might have a conscience clause, but then they would have to refer to someone who will do it. So that would be a dead letter. The conscience clause would be a dead letter. And so the idea of a right is, I think, at the heart of the problem. I don't believe there is such a right.
Theodore, I wanted to ask you about something that the whole world is watching. Kim Jong-un, president of North Korea, threatening a nuclear warhead to hit the U.S. territory of Guam. President Trump, of course, threatened, saying that he'll respond with fire and fury. Is this a rhetorical grenade? Does this scare people around the world, or do you think he's acting appropriately?
Which? Who?
President Trump's response to
I think,
the dictator.
I don't see that he would have any choice but to retaliate in that way. Whether, of course, the North Koreans actually mean what they say is another question. Because they've been threatening. I've been to North Korea. It is the most terrible place on earth. It's the worst place on earth by a long shot, as far as I can see. And they are mad. But whether they would be mad enough to do this, I don't know. They've been saying these kind of things for a very long time. And maybe one day they will actually do it.
Your book, The Proper Procedure and Other Stories, as I'm reading accounts of it and reviews, this seems to deal with, at least in part, what the term I use, sophisticated barbarians that are degrading the culture, Western civilization at present. And I wonder if you could describe some of the truths contained in the fictional stories you write.
Well, what I've described is the life as it's actually lived in the area of the city in which I actually worked, and the complete breakdown of family life, the rule of areas by psychopaths because no one would intervene. There's more to it than that, of course, because what I want to show is it's one thing to talk about it in the abstract, and it's another thing to show it in concrete, so that I also deal, for example, with the cruelty or indifference of bureaucracies in the face of suffering. So, for example, I tell a story of a man, a decent man, who tries to get music, very loud music, played by a neighbor, tries to get control of that, tries to get the authorities to intervene, because unlike most people around him, he has to go to work. And he is the one who ends up in prison, and he is the one who ends up committing suicide. And this is caused by the elaborate charade of the bureaucracy, which claims to be interested in the welfare of the population under its control. And I want to capture just how terrible it is to live under the direction of that bureaucracy. You can, as I said, talk about it in the abstract, but when you read an actual story of what it's like, it comes home to you much more clearly.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if how you react to the discussion we're having in this country about real news and fake news, your truthiness, to borrow Stephen Colbertism. Does the kind of I have my truth, you have your truth, we can operate in silos where I don't have to consider yours and you don't have to consider mine, and be copacetic, or is that the kind of part of the breakdown of the individual to the benefit of the bureaucracy that you're describing in your fictional story, which has all too real connections?
Well, of course, I believe that there is a truth to be found. I mean, whether we ever found the truth, as it were, there is always relevant evidence and proper argumentation, and so on and so forth. And the idea of people living within their own beliefs and never considering counter evidence is to me anathema. This is a terrible breakdown. It's a prelude to civil war, actually.
So, in terms of culture, it seems to me we're at a place where you talk about the salient issue of the day, euthanasia and the Charlie Gard case, who has the right to decide, whatever issue that is preeminent, freedom of speech and expression on college campuses. It seems to me it all kind of comes back to this choice of two camps. You're either in the camp where you believe in peaceful pluralism, or you're in the sort of sophisticated barbarian, and oftentimes not so sophisticated, it's a bit of an oxymoron, sophisticated barbarian camp where you're going to impose your will and root out heterodoxy. Is that a fair binary?
Yes, well, it does seem to be like that, and unfortunately it seems that, to me anyway, that people are more and more inclined to reprehend any form of heterodoxy, anything that you can have any opinion you like so long as it's mine.
Mm-hmm.
And
so we just compete for control of the bureaucracy to impose.
Yes. Yeah. Mm. And you see what I think, I'm no expert, I think what you might very well find is that when there's a change of regime, if I can call it that, in America, it'll just impose its views even more strongly than before.
He is Theodore Dalrymple. He's an English writer, psychiatrist, also a prison psychiatrist, spent a lot of his career working in the prisons in Britain. And his new book is The Proper Procedure and Other Stories. Theodore Dalrymple, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a